Hello and welcome to my CSET 4850 final presentation. My name is Trent Monnin and today I'll be going over payment processing security. So brief overview of what I'll be discussing today. I'll be going over an introduction, data on breaches, specifically fraud. Next I'll be talking about notable fraud techniques and then actions against these techniques. And then lastly, my thoughts and opinions on the matter. So first, a quick introduction of what payment processing security is. This is basically the processing and data management in regards to online purchases or purchases via credit or debit card. So as we can see through the payments processing chain, we start with the consumer with this credit card. It goes to a merchant, then the merchant's bank, then to the payment brand, and then lastly to the cardholder's bank, back down through the chain, and finally to the merchant's backend database. Sorry. So the first online shop was opened in 1994, just to give you an idea of how long this has been around. Walmart, the largest company in the world, does about 8% of total sales online. So this shows how big of a matter this is. Online sales has bred the wealthiest man in the world in Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon. And the last data point I want to cover is the U.S. Federal Reserve found that $97.04 trillion was spent in non-cash payments in 2018. So this just kind of gives a rough idea of how massive this market is. Next, we have data on breaches, specifically credit card fraud. I decided to cover credit card fraud specifically because nearly 80% of all fraudulent purchases are directly related to credit card fraud and identity theft. Also, a research study in 2019 showed that it cost the United States economy about $181 to $364 billion every year. Lastly, fraud affects about 14 million Americans every year. So I wanted to quickly highlight a research study done by Nets across 6 countries in the EU. It used an AI engine to track fraud throughout these 6 countries. So as you can see, we have 6 different rows representing the different countries and also 5 different columns representing the information that I found notable. So one thing that I found quite interesting about this is that there's a direct correlation between the number of cards in millions of each country and the card fraud loss ratio. So as you can see, there is 180.2 million cards in the UK, and the total card fraud losses in millions was 69.7. And even adjusted for population, it seems like France and the UK have the highest card fraud loss ratio. When you look at these other countries, they seem to have a lower fraud loss ratio. And I think that we can just attribute that to maybe opportunistic theft, to where the attackers see there are more cards to choose from, so they more often steal from these countries. Next, I wanted to touch on the 6 notable fraud techniques. The first one is lost or stolen cards. So this is quite obvious what this is. It's when an owner loses or has their card stolen. This is the technique with the most amount of risk for the perpetrator because they have to actually go and use the card or steal the card. So this is the one that occurs the most risk. Next one is account takeover. So this is when enough data is stolen from the perpetrator, for the perpetrator to log into the account and act as the owner. Next is the cardholder not present technique. And this is any kind of purchase where the owner of the card is not required to be there or for the purchase of the item. This could be for items purchased online or over the phone. Next, we have fake and counterfeit cards. So these are just fraudulent cards that are created. Just like fake IDs or fake currency can be created, so can fake cards. Next, we have skimming. So this is when card information is taken via a skimmer. A skimmer is a small device that takes the information via the magnetic strip on the back of the card, and that can be uploaded to your own card. Next, we have the white plastic technique. This kind of goes hand in hand with the skimming technique. It's to where the magnetic strip information is replicated on a blank white plastic card. Next, I wanted to discuss the action against these attacks. So first, I wanted to emphasize the importance of getting ahead of the curve and being diligent when identifying these attacks. This allows us to limit the amount of data lost when there is an attack, and also allows us to be prepared for them by staying ahead of the curve. So there's three main methods to combat identity theft. The first one is tokenization. So this is basically keeping the information encrypted throughout the transfer process. So that payment security chain that we looked at earlier, it's basically just keeping information encrypted throughout that. So if information does happen to be taken, it can't be read. Next, we have 3D secure authentication. This means that we need three entities to verify data. So this could be having a bank verify data, it's basically just having three different companies verify your data to make sure that it is you, in fact, using the card. Lastly, we have address verification service. So this ensures the billing address and the one linked with the credit card are the same. So by doing this, it basically just ensures that whoever is purchasing an item and putting in the billing address, if it's not linked with the credit card address, it will just raise some red flags and make the site and the company suspicious of who's actually buying this product or service. Lastly, I just wanted to give a few of my thoughts and opinions on the matter. So as we learned throughout the course, it's always better to be proactive rather than reactive. So it's better to prevent the loss of money or data in the first place rather than try to retrieve it by being reactive. Next is to act immediately. This is basically to ensure that we lose the least amount of data or cash in our case as possible. Lastly, we just want to be aware through education. It's best to know the scams and the hacks of the day so that you can avoid these and be cautious of them. Lastly, I would just suggest that we look out for one another. And I have one last slide to illustrate this last point. So as we can see here, the victims of tech support scams, the Federal Trade Commission did a report of the median individual loss to fraud reported in 2018 by age group. And as you can see, there's a huge disparity of amongst those above 80 years old. And I think that scammers like to prey on them because they're less tech savvy and they're not as educated on these topics. On the other side, we can see the money lost due to fraud by method of contact. This is most of the time how these scammers are able to get a hold of these elderly folks, is via contact by email, phone, or mail. So lastly, here's my works cited. And thank you. I hope you learned something. Have a good day.